And there's been so much build-up, there's been so much anticipation, analysis, and predicting what could possibly come out of the BRICS Summit. And here we are, wrapping things up in Sandton. Rofhiwa Madzena is still down there for us. Going to be a very, very busy day, because what has not been said is going to have to be discussed today, isn't it, Rofhiwa? And one of those has got to be this issue of expansion. And this is what everybody was predicting was going to be the big talking point. But it seems to have all been behind closed doors. At least to my mind, I haven't really picked up anything clear-cut about what the plan actually is.
That's absolutely correct, Gareth. A very good morning to you and our early morning viewers. That is the big talking point at the summit, the 15th BRICS Summit, the expansion of the community to create a global south, something that would rival the global west or the developed nations in the world. And it's important, Gareth, because the challenges and the struggles of those in developing nations are completely different from those in the developed world. And yet we find ourselves relying on developed nations for basic things that we should be able to do for ourselves as developing nations, given the exclusivity or the uniqueness of our challenges as developing nations. So those conversations obviously been happening behind closed doors. The statesman not really indicating any finality in those discussions. But we did speak we did hear from Minister Naledi Pandor, who says that those discussions have indeed been happening, and we are expected to hear from the heads of state about what the way forward will be before the end of this particular summit. Let's just listen to the minister there on those discussions around the expansion of the BRICS community.
We have agreed on the matter of expansion. We have a document that we've adopted which sets out guidelines and principles, processes for considering countries that wish to become members of BRICS. The more detailed announcement will be made by the BRICS leaders before the conclusion of the summit. So that's very positive. I think as well, the establishment of the Women's Alliance within BRICS is extremely important, and the youth formation. For the first time, we had two young people, two young leaders, addressing the BRICS leaders, and in a very, very, I thought, positive and inspiring manner, setting out the aspirations of young people of the BRICS countries for the role that they hope BRICS will play in the development of young people. The responses for the leaders were insightful as well, focusing on skills as key areas, but also welcoming that our youth want global partnerships, want to relate to each other across the regions that make up BRICS.
So that's very important, isn't it, Rofhiwa, as well, as we take a look at some of the visuals from the Sandton Convention Centre at the moment. Still busy getting ready for the delegates to arrive later, because it's not just about who are the countries, which countries, I think maybe is the right way to say it, which countries want to join BRICS, but you have to ask the obvious question: why? Why would they want to be part of BRICS, and why would BRICS let them in?
Right. That's a very important question, Gareth, because you don't want to invite anyone into a stable if they're not going to be contributing positively when they join that stable. So you've got various countries that have applied to join. Those include Iran and Saudi Arabia. So we know that Iran has huge oil reserves, and Saudi Arabia being one of the biggest oil producers. What would this do to the price of Brent crude, right? It would completely change the financing models around the price of Brent, and we might find ourselves benefiting from the prices of Brent crude, given that you've got the likes of Iran and Saudi Arabia with those oil reserves to provide to us. We've also got Ethiopia, which is one of the fastest growing economies on the African continent. They've got vast demographics, and they've also got the land in which agricultural projects can be pursued, and that of course will contribute to issues around food security. Brazil and South Africa have been an integral part of agricultural progress within the BRICS nations, so that's an important aspect to consider as well. And then you've got other countries that have created financing models that will allow for the expansion, if you will, for the new development bank. So a key issue around the expansion of BRICS is finding financing and investment models that will allow resources to be unlocked in the different emerging market economies. And then you've got countries that have already created models that will enhance what was created by the BRICS countries, which is the new development bank, and that will certainly rival your likes of the World Bank or the IMF, even though the BRICS countries have said we didn't create the new development bank to rival those funding institutions, but to simply create an alternative with criteria that wouldn't be as stringent as that we've seen from the IMF or the World Bank, and criteria that doesn't infringe of the sovereignty of the countries that apply for financing. So these are very interesting conversations, and it's almost finding an alternative way of being a part of the global community and not necessarily really going with the way that developed nations have been going for, well, since the beginning of civilization, one would argue. Finding just a new way of doing things, a new way that would suit you and me who live in an emerging economy as opposed to someone who lives in a developed nation like the United States or within the borders of the European Union.
Oh, and you almost cued me very nicely to talk about the United States and AGOA as well. Being very quiet on this, I'm sure there'll be reaction from, let's call it the West in this case, after this BRICS summit. But I'm glad you spoke about the oil as well, because you spoke about this, you and I, yesterday, the production levels, the economy coming down in China ever so slightly. We see a reduction in demand for oil, because you were talking about Iran being one of the countries as far as oil is concerned. Two others stand out for me. One is Algeria, as well when we talk African countries, also rich in oil and gas reserves. And I cannot help but wonder, with Egypt's interest in this, what you've got is the oil, you've got the technology with another applicant, that being Nigeria, and then geopolitically, Egypt, I think, could be one of the key countries simply because of the Suez Canal.
That's right, Gareth. I mean, it's very interesting to see the different nuances that the countries bring to the table here. And you're absolutely correct about Egypt's strategic positioning as a country and the opportunities that it would unlock for the flow of goods, services, and all sorts of produce from the different countries that are part of this trading bloc, should it be finalized today. And that, I think, is the important thing, is that there is something that each and every country that wants to be a part of BRICS can bring to the table, something that, if put on a bigger scale, such as the scale of BRICS, which is about 43% of the world's population, then they are able to take full advantage of whatever resource or skill set that they can provide. And I tell you, with Egypt and India, when it comes to the efforts around technological advances, it can only mean amazing things for essential sectors like agriculture. I mean, India has given various examples of how it's been able to use technology to bring healthcare, basic services like water, electricity, the growth of the agricultural space, its resilience against the extreme weather conditions that we've been seeing over the last few weeks in India. So one would argue that these are exciting times. And one wonders why the United States hasn't said anything, or the global West, if you will, because this is an important development. It completely changes the power dynamics of global trade and global relations. And also, it puts into question what the likes of an AGOA is going to look like after these BRICS have joined, after these countries have joined BRICS, because it was a deal that was specifically designed for Southern Africa. But what would it look like when Southern African countries and other countries around the world and in South America are now part of the BRICS community? So these are conversations that I'm sure we're going to continue to have, developments that I think are going to be very interesting, but I'm optimistic they're going to be beneficial for us, Gareth.